Hello and welcome to the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and I'm speaking today with Erik Wetterling, also known as the Hedgeless Horseman, founder and editor of the Hedgeless Horseman website, which we will put a link to down below. And Erik, great getting you on the show just to talk about the critical mineral space again today. It's hard to ignore the rise of copper. Copper today knocking on $4.98 a pound, pushing that $5 barrier again. And it's had a big move really the last couple months. And last time we talked a week ago, we were looking at some of the fundamentals on copper, but it seems like every day we get swamped with even more news as to why there's going to be a need for more copper, not just globally, but also domestically in the West. So I guess let's just start there with Dr. Copper.
Yeah, so I mean, like I think we talked about last time, I felt like I've been relatively late to the copper theme. It's like, I mean, I've been hearing the, let's say, forecasted supply deficits and all that. But the more lately I've, been looking into AI especially, and just looking at the energy consumption of the crypto space. And of course, the talk about EVs and just the fact that, hey, we're not making any new discoveries really. And when they had the Cobra Panama incident and what have you, I mean, it's just, I like the idea that there's so many themes working in copper's favor from a demand perspective, and we know it's hard as hell to actually get something into production. And the best thing, of course, is that I don't really care where the metals are trading right now or where they're going to go in the short term or anything like that, because I'm mostly an investor. I'm buying the companies, and in this case, like, even if one is sort of late to the copper party in a sense, because copper is touching all-time highs today. I mean, a lot of the juniors, they're not, they live in a completely different universe. I've looked at some junior copper explorers today or developers, and like, they're barely up. I mean, the retail sector is still out of this trade. It's just the big boys. I mean, they're betting on EV metals and all of that. And now, I guess we saw Biden come out, or, there's in the news now that Biden is set to increase a bunch of tariffs, quadrupling the tariffs on EVs, for example. And again, the more I read about the AI, just the energy demand from AI, and ChatGPT just released their newest version. I mean, it's just incredible when you think about it. The themes that are working in, let's say, copper and the EV metals favors right now, and this AI thing. I mean, it's just like the internet or whatever. I mean, the pace is just absolutely unreal. And that's with all computing power, I was going to say, the chip efficiency, it's going exponential.
Well, and with all of those data centers for the AI, there's going to need to be a lot more power generation, but copper plays into just because of the power transmission. Same thing with the EVs. If they want more of a domestic supply in the US or in Canada of products like EV, solar panels, batteries, they're going to need a lot more critical minerals sourced domestically. And so that kind of plays into the mining stocks. Where is the supply going to come from? And it's not just that there's a lot of mines in the lineup. There's a lot of projects that are at development stage or at resource stage, but really there's a kind of a mad rush to find more resources domestically. So I think when we had talked last week, Erik, we mentioned Hannon Metals was one you were considering, as well as Hot Chili, Hot Chili being down in South America. But there's a lot of other copper that are in nations friendly with the West or in North America. Are there any other companies that have your attention in the copper sphere?
Yeah, I like to spread my bets around, and my focus recently have been, it's like, okay, what the West needs and the West doesn't typically produce, let's say. And there's example like Magna Mining. I think a lot of people forgets that Magna actually has a lot of its revenue, or, potential revenue coming in from copper. I think the NSR value is like maybe 40% right now of copper. I might be wrong on that, but it's material. Let's put it like that. So Magna is like, okay, internally diversified, and they're going to be one of the most near-term producers in the junior space, and they have copper. So that's one I really like. It's obviously maybe in the best place, in the best jurisdiction, Sudbury, Canada. Then Stillwater Critical Minerals. Sure, they're not copper focused in that sense. They have a bunch of critical minerals: nickel, copper, PGMs, they have what? I think they have some rhodium, etc. So it's like, and they're in the US. It's like US still has one operating nickel mine, which is kind of absurd given they have a, what, $35 trillion economy. So I think, again, it's like the West, if you want to focus somewhere, it would be in the West and what the West doesn't have. That's my opinion, at least. And actually, recently I've looked into Gladiator Metals. I only bought a few shares so far, but they're kind of, brownfield exploration up in Canada for copper. And that's not a, big copper porphyry. That's more of a junior-friendly kind of system, which I think looks pretty interesting. A lot of historic drilling and all that used to be, again, a producer. And of course, another favorite of mine, which I think is almost a bit unique, it's pre-discovery, but that's Inflection Resources with their campaign down in New South Wales, Australia, where they control an entire belt looking for gold copper porphyries. I mean, if they find something there, given the tailwinds again, that's a place where you would probably want to own a long-lived large copper asset, and that's why I guess they got AngloGold interested. That's the thing that's hard, I think, with coppers specifically, that it's very expensive exploration, especially if we're talking porphyry systems. So in those cases, I prefer to see big players backing them. And then, of course, there's like Brixton Metals, which has BHP. But Gladiator, I think, for example, they have more of a, again, junior-friendly system, and some of the others have major backing, the Glencores, the AngloGolds, and what have you. So those are a few I like. Again, it's like I'm not all in on anything. It's like you never know what's going to happen. I just think that all of these, to me, look cheap. Some of them are riskier than others. But hey, in terms of, are they pricing in the current copper price or what the future copper price might be, assuming that these trends continue? I don't think so.
Well, and it's interesting to note that a lot of the copper companies, whether they're seniors or juniors, are really polymetallic companies. Like when you think about Magna or Stillwater, they're really nickel forward companies, but they have the PGMs, but they also have copper, and then they also have other metals in there. Same thing with Inflection. They're looking for both gold and copper. And really, when you think about most of the copper deposits, they come with other metals. So sometimes you're maybe playing a nickel or a gold company that has a copper kicker, and other times it's a copper company that has other metals as a kicker. I mean, speaking about polymetallic, there's some big news coming out of Sweden. And I know we've been following the story with District Metals, who has these large polymetallic deposits that also have uranium in the mix, along with a lot of other base metals. You were mentioning before the call today that you're pretty excited to see the news that comes out later this week, and that deals with the Swedish moratorium potentially being lifted, or at least more clarity around it. Maybe walk us through what's going on in Sweden, Erik.
Yes, so on May the 15th, which is tomorrow, Sweden is set to put out the conclusion of their uranium moratorium study. Basically, I think it's like a recommendation if they believe that Sweden should lift it or not. So I think that's going to be a big thing. If they come out with a positive conclusion that the uranium moratorium should be lifted, I know some people think it could get lifted this year in that case. So, and basically, of course, the flip side of that, if they come out with a recommendation that Sweden shouldn't lift the uranium moratorium, then I don't think they are going to lift it, not anytime soon anyway. So I think it's a really big deal for Sweden's uranium sector, but I also think it's like the signal value, because we've seen the regulations, new regulations out of the EU, for example. And I listened to a recent interview by Boliden where the CEO said he's more hopeful than he's been in many years of them putting a new largest copper mine in Europe into production, simply because things are changing in Europe and Sweden. And again, that's copper, but still, I think the signal value is good. And if we get a positive conclusion tomorrow, I think it's just going to bring Sweden more on the map, actually. So for District Metals, I believe that 90% of the rally we've seen in District Metals over the last year or so is tied to their huge optionality play on uranium. And I mean, there's a bunch of other metals in there. They have 2 billion pounds of like zinc and a lot of nickel and everything like that. I mean, these are super giant deposits. They're just unreal, the alum shale deposits, but they are very low grade. So it's, again, a huge optionality play. And then there's also another way, I think, to play it, because obviously if they come out with a negative recommendation, I think DMX, District Metals, is going to take a big hit if we assume that 90% of the rally has been tied to the uranium part. Mawson Gold, basically at face value, I think their shareholdings in Southern Cross is worth as much as their current market cap. And they have basically staked all the known conventional, not alum shale, but conventional uranium deposits in northern Sweden. So that's another way to play it from a more low risk perspective. They don't have the huge beta, but at the same time, at face value, if Sweden comes out with a negative recommendation, you didn't pay for the uranium assets anyway. You get your money back in the Southern Cross shareholding. So I'm a holder of both, and I'm optimistic that they will lift it. I think the winds are changing in Europe. I think there's a lot of pressure from EU to have Sweden go ahead with this uranium thing, and also not only that, but just to build more mines. So it's like I'm bullish on Sweden overall. I think the winds are changing, and the Boliden CEO is saying that as well. And another thing to note, I recently saw that BHP is actually applying to expand their land package, looking for nickel in the Bergslagen region. And this is the same BHP which recently said, we're probably going to put our nickel mines in Australia on care and maintenance. I find it quite interesting that they're still optimistic about looking for nickel in Sweden right now.
Well, Erik, with some of these projects, all of these juniors, it's going to take partnering with a manufacturer or with government money or with a larger major to get projects like this built to actually bring supply online. So to the point we made at the onset, we need more supply with nations that are friendly with the West, trading partners, or actually in the West. Do you anticipate a wave of strategic partnerships to come into a lot of these companies, or do you anticipate more M&A, or do you expect that maybe some of them joint venture? Because the question is, even if they find a lot of resources, any of these companies, how are they going to get it out of the ground?
Sure. I mean, that's I was going to say that's a hard question to answer. I would think there's going to be more M&A. And I mean, look at it from this perspective. I mean, what are the major miners doing mostly now? I mean, they're buying up other operating mines. They're not acquiring developing assets or a lot of pre-discovery assets or whatever. Yeah, they're investing in them though, but still, I mean, that kind of, I think, sends a signal. It's like they think, especially for copper, for example, they think the price rise is around the corner and they want to benefit from that, and because they don't think that it's priced into the companies they're acquiring. And you can see that in the junior space. Or are they pricing in any kind of rosy scenario for copper or any metal for that matter? No, they're not. So I think that's kind of signal that they're front running something they expect to happen really soon. So when they've taken care of that, maybe they'll go out and do even more in terms of looking at projects that might be in operation 10 to 15 years from now. But I think they're in a mad scramble to hoard the supply for themselves right now. And we've seen a lot of deals, around the world with majors. So, I mean, I think that's going to be a theme. And who knows, maybe this has just started. Maybe there's going to be a decade-long bull in commodities and miners overall, because we've never seen something like this, I think, where you have the ability to put a mine into production getting worse and worse and worse, going into increased demand. And now there's other themes for some of these metals in particular, like copper, that we haven't really seen before either. Not at the pace that AI is expanding. So it's like, in my opinion, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what way the majors will take, but I do think there's going to be governments needing to throw money. That's what I've been hearing in Europe, for example. That's like, I've talked to people who are involved in the critical mineral space in Europe, that they think that there's going to be, maybe there already is, but it's like government funds that's going to be pouring money on some of these initiatives, especially I think in Scandinavia, because let's face it, like where else are you going to put up a mine? In wine districts of France and Italy and Germany? No, I don't think so. I think Scandinavia, the Nordics, are going to play a major part. And also that's why I think that the recommendation tomorrow is going to be positive. let's put it like this, there's high level geopolitics going on behind the scenes.
All right, well, we'll follow along with the news out of Sweden to see how that goes. It could be big news for companies like District Metals and Mawson Gold. And then, yeah, like you say, there's a mad scramble really everywhere to find more copper resources, more nickel resources, more critical minerals resources, and we'll keep our eyes on this sector. It's fun to talk about this. I'm sure we'll get back to the gold stocks very soon, but with copper racing today near $5, it was just fun to look again at the critical mineral space, and in specific copper and uranium in Sweden. Erik, always great having you on the show. And if people want to follow along with Erik's work, definitely click on the link below. It takes you over to the Hedgeless Horseman website. And we'll talk to you again next week, Erik.
Thank you, Chad. Have a great day. And assume I'm biased. Some companies are banner sponsors, and I own most of them, I think.